I think what people are understanding for the first time is how vulnerable not only restaurant workers are, but also how vulnerable restaurants are. I think customers have been, particularly the customers that I have contact with, which are my customers, have become incredibly enlightened. Like, I'm just blown away, incredibly enlightened as to what is actually happening within the four walls of a restaurant.
Martha Hoover, a giant on the Indiana restaurant scene, on the pandemic's impact and what a seat at the table looks like now. Her passion for food, well, she traces it back to a trip to Paris, paid for by babysitting money. She put her culinary dreams aside, instead graduating law school and then working as a sex crimes prosecutor. But that nagging desire to open a restaurant never left. The incredible journey of Café Patachou's Martha Hoover on this episode of the Business and Beyond podcast. Hello and welcome to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick. Well, Martha Hoover has certainly been a powerhouse in the Hoosier restaurant industry for more than 30 years. But she took a big detour before she got there, serving as a sex crimes prosecutor in Marion County in the 1980s. She took a break to take care of her kids before eventually fulfilling her dream of opening a restaurant in 1990, Café Patachou. It's a path almost unheard of for a woman back then. She introduced the farm-to-table concept to Indiana long before anyone ever knew what it was. Hoover's Student Union for Adults, as she calls it, quickly became destination dining. Passionate, insightful, driven, and a fierce advocate for women and minorities to get their fair shot at business success, I'm pleased to be joined by Café Patachou owner and president, Martha Hoover. Martha, it's great to see you virtually here on the podcast. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you. That was a very flattering and generous welcome. Thank you very much, Gary.
Well, very appropriate for you to be sure. I kind of know, I think I know the answer to this question. What's the last year been like for you in the restaurant business? It's been tough for all industries, but especially those in the restaurant industry.
Yeah, I think the restaurant industry, I want to say there's a collective agreement that the restaurant industry has been particularly hard hit. It's been extraordinarily difficult, but the good news is that we really see an end to what was just the worst year of our industry's life. What we've also seen, and what I'm looking forward to, is that there's been for the first time, I think, a reckoning, an opportunity for reckoning in the industry of some very toxic industry-wide practices that have historically been in place. And I also think for the first time, customers, the community of customers, understands the pressure that restaurants live under. And I think we're going to all come out of it. If we can survive, we should come out of it in a better position.
Yeah. When you talk about those toxic practices, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, sexism, gender issues, issues regarding how people of color, how women, how immigrants are treated, and how truly, very similar to most industry, the restaurant industry has been defined by through the lens of white males. And truthfully, the system as it has been designed, it's a broken business model. And many restaurants, most restaurants, I venture to say, have very toxic practices in terms of who they hire, who they promote, how they promote, and not just promote, but how they offer opportunities to people outside of a very narrow window of white males.
And you're very passionate, obviously, about diversity and inclusion, and
yeah,
we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that a little more in a moment. But one more question on the restaurant business. You see, you kind of seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. What's your outlook for 2021, maybe into 2022?
Well, I don't think we're going to have this automatic bounce back that everyone is so hopeful for. I think it will be gradual. One of my biggest concerns right now is that so much talent has left the restaurant industry, not just in the nation, not just regionally, but in our own city. People who, once they were furloughed in March of last year, made decisions that they needed an industry that was more stable. And one of my issues with the restaurant industry has always been the lack of professionalization. We treat our employees as if they are truly professionals and not gig workers. And I think that a lot of talent just got frustrated with how restaurants in general treated them, with the way they were paid, the way they were treated, the way that they were given opportunities for growth. And as a result, people have abandoned. We've seen about a quarter of our team that was furloughed on March 16th has made the decision to not work in the restaurant industry. And that trend is pretty much what I know is going on nationally as well. Maybe even higher, maybe even like a third of the people that once were in the restaurant industry have given up. So that automatically reduces our pool of talent. And that's going to be a real struggle for us.
Yeah, and you've made a real point, a real focus. You talk about that professionalism of the industry as you have grown your restaurant empire. Really, you put a focus on employees and giving them benefits and a number of things that maybe not traditionally present or prevalent in the restaurant industry. How important is that to the culture that you've created at Café Patachou and your other restaurants?
Well, I think actually what's more critically important than looking at benefits are important. There are very few restaurants that offer matching 401ks for any employee. We do that. And I think that's probably one of our finest benefits, because I believe that the best thing a job offers, let's just talk any general job, is the opportunity for collective prosperity, the opportunity for knowledge, for shared knowledge, the opportunity for advancement, and the opportunity for people to accumulate wealth. The restaurant industry is built on a model where most people, vast majority of people employed in the restaurant industry, earn a non-livable wage. So what we decided to do day one was to give people a livable wage. It shouldn't be where somebody has to have 3 and 4 jobs in an industry in order to be able to pay rent.
Now, you don't view yourself as a pioneer, but you're a pioneer in the industry, to be sure. You have created again a restaurant dynamo. How many restaurants now? 12? Is that right?
We officially have 14, but we only have 10 open currently.
Got it. Think back to that first opening, Café Patachou, iconic location there, 49th and Penn, right?
Yeah.
30 plus years ago. Does it seem like it was that long ago, or does it seem like it was yesterday?
Well, you know how it is when you look at your children, right? You go the days are long, but the years are short. And that's how I feel. There are many moments when I so wish I was back in that 1989, 1990 mode of losing sleep and changing diapers, as opposed to having adult children. So you kind of get it. It's been a really fun here's the thing, Gary, I really love what I do. I think I won the job lottery, and I cannot ever imagine being in another industry that would bring me the level of inspiration and pride than I have in the restaurant industry. But the fact that 30 years ago I started a restaurant, having never worked in a restaurant, is especially, I think you mentioned this in your introduction, at a time when women in restaurant they weren't owners, they weren't the lead chefs, they weren't the business brains, they were literally relegated to much more to much lesser roles. So it's been wonderful.
Yeah. Well, again, you had zero kitchen, zero restaurant experience. And at the time, I think you looked at that lack of experience as a positive, right?
It wasn't until I got a little reflective that I saw how positive it was. Interestingly, the entire world looked at my lack of experience. There were a couple of things. It was my lack of experience. I'd never worked in a business. I was not a chef. I'd never worked in a restaurant. I have 2 young children at home. And when I opened my restaurant, guess what? I did not know I was pregnant with my 3rd child. So yeah, those were all pretty big recipes for disaster. Plus take into account that no one had really discovered food in 1989. And so the world was very different. And I was a working woman. That was something that was very different back then as well. And I was trying to do something that was not derivative of what restaurants were in 1989. I was doing something that was actually really original. Now that I look back on it, I see that in the moment, I kind of knew just what everyone else knew, is that this was a very risky undertaking. But that risky, I've discovered 2 things about myself. Really, over 30 years, I've discovered a million things, but 2 things pertinent to this conversation. One is that I enjoy creating things. The second is that I do not do well in organizations that don't understand and accept the need for change. So controlling my own organization and setting the principle from day one that we're never going to be satisfied with the status quo. Change is going to be part of our DNA, has really enabled us to remain relevant, I believe, and to grow not only with what the business needs, but with what our customers need, what the market needs, all that.
Yeah, the challenges that you faced as a woman in opening that first restaurant 30 plus years ago, Café Patachou. I read a piece that I thought was very interesting. As you were opening that restaurant or getting close, a contractor had left out a very important piece, right, of the kitchen. Tell that story.
Yeah, this is true. It was the architect who drew. Now, I have this strong belief that when you hire a professional architect, lawyer, builder, whatever, they need to guide you and advocate for you at every step of the way. I went in as a complete neophyte. I had no idea. I had never really been in a restaurant kitchen. So I had this architect design everything for me, a well-known kitchen architect, actually. And of course, the first day we opened, I'm in there and I'm like, we're washing dishes. We have no dishwasher. We have no automatic dishwasher. And I called the builder up and said, where the heck is my dishwasher? And he said, we made the decision to leave the dishwasher out because it was expensive to plumb in and expensive for you to purchase. And here's the kicker, we did not want to waste your husband's money.
Wow.
They were gaming on the fact that I would not be in business. They also were assuming, making assumptions is incredibly dangerous. And they made an assumption that this was a hobby, not a business, that it was my husband's money, that I didn't have anything at risk, and that they would make this decision on my behalf without ever talking to me about it. So that was lesson number 1. But it didn't stop there. History full of instances where people doubted that we could do what we were doing, because not only was I the founder of the company and in the restaurants, but you tend to hire in your own image. So I hired a lot of very strong professional women. And I'd say as a group, there was a lot of misogyny, not just locally, but, for instance, with the journalism, with press. Luckily, we're seeing a little change in that. And thank you for all you've done to not only promote my business, but to also promote other women who are doing things
Absolutely.
in the city.
Absolutely.
It's really important that we get the airplay.
Yep.
That
Get that visibility.
offer.
Get that visibility to be sure. Let's go back a few years prior to that. And really, as I understand it, what really piqued your interest, what really got your passion going for the restaurant business and food. And that was a trip you took, I think, as a 17-year-old to Paris. You paid for it with your babysitting money, right?
Yeah. So it actually started a little bit before that. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, but my parents are New Yorkers, but almost immediately we moved to Galveston, Texas, where my father was with the University of Texas. And of course, Texas, back in the 60s, we had no access to food. We had access to food, but not to culturally diverse food at all. And we would go back to New York several times a year to visit family. And my mind would just explode with all the neighborhood markets and the restaurants, especially the ethnic restaurants that we would go to. It was the highlight of our family's trips home, was to eat. So I became obsessed with food at a really young age. And I'll tell you a story that really happened. I think I was about 10 or so, 9 or 10. And we were in Brooklyn, New York, visiting family. We're Jewish for one of the Jewish holidays. I think it I don't know. It was one of the fall holidays. And I went to the produce stand with my father, very typical of cities like Brooklyn. You don't have huge supermarkets, or you didn't back then. You had these little, you had a produce store, a bakery, a butcher shop. So we went shopping to gather food for the meal. And there was a basket of melons and a sign on it that said Posey County melons. And I don't remember the price, but I remember it being really expensive. And my dad stopped and laughed and said, "Oh my God, those are Posey County melons." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Those are the best melons. And they're from Indiana." And I said, "Well, why haven't we ever had them?"
Southern Indiana,
Southern Indiana. And it just like started connecting the dots regarding food where we were in Indianapolis. At that point, we had moved to Indianapolis, and where we were. And it just got me going down this path of really doing everything I could to learn about food, not just food that was grown in our backyard, but food. My father had been a World War II vet and had spent his entire time in the war, admittedly, he said, learning French and eating food. He did not have hardship duty, obviously, during World War II, but he made the stories of the food that he ate, the simple food, the very rustic foods. I mean, it was wartime. They weren't eating in restaurants, but even what he told me as a child about how beautiful the country was and the farming and everything, all I wanted to do was get there. So yes, I was one of those very nerdy kids in high school. And Friday night, when my friends were out partying, I was babysitting. I had a standing babysitting date with some neighbors down our street, and for their date night. And I saved every dime. And 3 days after I graduated from high school, I was on a plane to Paris. And I ended up staying there. My first time, I ended up staying there about 4 months. And it just, it was just one of those moments of life that was truly a truly transformative. It wasn't just the restaurant experience.
When you got back from Paris, did you told your dad you wanted to maybe go abroad and be a chef? And he wasn't necessarily sold on that, right?
It's funny. My parents were huge advocates of education. Huge. They made us understand from moment one that we had no path without going to college. That was their mentality. That was that generation's mentality. And my father in particular would sit me down and say things like, I was smart and I could accomplish anything in the world. He was very supportive as long as I was getting educated. When I mentioned that I wanted to go to France and become a chef, he said, "Yeah, That's the one thing you're never going to be allowed to do. You're a woman. You can do anything, but you can't do that. So I backburnered it. I bought into that. I mean, that was my source of information. We didn't have the internet. There was no Google. I didn't know what else to do. So I went on to school, and I happened to be one of these people who love school. So that was not punishment for me. I really enjoyed school. And I made a habit of being able to save money and go to Paris, go to France very often, much more often after I graduated from college because of financial reasons. But France still remains a remarkable inspiration for me, with not just restaurants, not just what's on the plate, but for the culture's love of food, love of the experience at the table, the camaraderie, the community that's built around food. And that really is what keeps me going in this industry.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Well, as mentioned, you got your law degree at IU, went on to work at the Marion County Prosecutor's Office, took a break to stay at home with your children after your second child. As you mentioned, you didn't know it, you were pregnant with child number 3 when you got this restaurant bug. We're going to get into those early restaurant days in a moment. But first of all, the ticking sound we hear now is our 2-minute drill. Martha, where I ask some quick questions, get your quick answers to some of the day's most pressing questions. So are you ready?
It's a good thing I had coffee today.
Exactly. Okay, let's start out. How about a favorite book? Are you reading something right now that you really like?
I am. I just started it actually last night. It's a book called, I have the book right on my table, Between Two Kingdoms. I do this thing, Gary, where I have 2 or 3 books at the same time, but that's just the one that rose to the top this morning.
Yeah, big reader. Okay, how about a favorite snack?
Oh, easy. Chips, any kind of chip. I am a chip freak.
Good. How about a favorite meal? A dinner, a meal? What would that be?
Well, I know I should say things like anything I cook when my family's home. Truly, I'm a very simple cook. So yes, our typical Sunday family meal when my children were all home was always a roasted chicken with some form of a beautiful salad and a potato dish and a lovely dessert.
Yeah. Do you have a pet peeve? What would your biggest pet peeve be?
People who don't put in the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When it comes to wine, red or white?
Clear. It's called vodka.
Very good. I like that. Dog or cat?
I love all animals, but I have to admit I'm partial to dogs. Dogs.
Okay. How about, do you remember favorite TV show? Did you have a favorite TV show as a kid?
Oh, growing up when I was in college, this is so corny, I loved the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
That was a great show. The one person outside of your family, is there one person who you feel has really had the most impact or influence on your life?
Well, I mean, there's so many people who have, everyone has an influence on my life. I would say in terms, I really can't say just one person. I wish.
Okay. Yeah. How about, here's one for you. You're having dinner at home in one of your restaurants. Are there 3 people, either living or deceased, who you would most like to share a meal with?
Oh my God, yes. Okay, let's see. Let's start at the top. Julia Child, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I only get one more choice.
One more, yeah.
Robin Williams.
Oh, that is an interesting one. That is a very interesting one, yeah. Well, you have passed with flying colors the 2-minute drill, Martha, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very much. When we return, we're going to delve into some of those early years in the restaurant business and a lot more. Our conversation with Martha Hoover continues on the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. That's when we return. Welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick. We are very pleased to have with us today as our guest Martha Hoover, the president and owner of Café Patachou and the owner of and creator, developer of an amazing empire, amazing group of restaurants that are really in the forefront here in Indianapolis and central Indiana and beyond. And Martha, thanks again for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Okay, hey, let's go back to Café Patachou and starting that restaurant, 1990. As you start, I know you have many remembrances of those early years, but as you started that, what were your thoughts? What were your feelings? You say that you never really let failure creep into your mind.
I have said this before, and this has been with me since I was a young kid. I've never had a plan B. I just don't step into the idea that if something fails, number one, it's the worst thing in the world. I have been pivoting my whole life, not just because of the pandemic, but if something doesn't work or isn't achieving whatever the goal is, I'm very adaptable, so I'm able to change. I think being mentally, intellectually flexible really is needed in any business as an owner, particularly the restaurant business. I say particularly, but it's the only business I know, so excuse me for that. But again, I just never thought that I would fail. I thought I would figure it out.
Yeah. What was there a moment when you said, "Hey, this is working. It's going to work, and I'm going to expand this thing. Not only Café Patachou, but some of these other brands that and concepts that you've created." Was it what was that like? When did you decide it was time to do that?
Well, the economic reality is that restaurants, and I know you've heard this a lot through the pandemic, restaurants are not nearly as profitable as people think. So when you're right. So in order to really get economy, you're forced to be in this mindset of expansion. But there was another component. I had started to see that people were kind of ripping off what I was doing. And I thought, if someone else is going to rip off and try to sabotage my sales, I'll do it. I'll just do it. And it just happened to coincide, this idea to expand really coincided with how where my children were in their lives. Remember, I started with very young children, including a brand new baby. So the expansion started really when my youngest was able to go to an all-day school. It became even further. The expansion plan grew as especially my younger as he grew, as he became more independent, I was able to do more. We could talk for hours about cultural expectations on women, especially working women. I won't go there. But truthfully, I didn't open up Café Patachou at 49th in Pennsylvania saying, one day I will have 10 of these and I'll be in 4 cities or whatever.
Right.
That was never my intention. It just happened. And again, that goes back to flexibility, understanding the pressures of the industry, and pressures of the market. So that's why I did it.
Yeah. You are very intentional and very passionate about locally sourced foods, farm to table, sustainability, those issues. And I saw a quote you had made, wanting to change the dynamic so we no longer define happiness or success by convenience and consumption.
It's true. Especially as you get to a point in life where you realize that time is the biggest luxury and that your runway continues to get shorter and shorter, you want to make a bigger impact.
Well, making an impact, that's another piece of the Martha Hoover story, I think, that continues to play out with the Patachou Foundation. Talk a little bit about that, because very, again, specific with the mission of childhood hunger and food accessibility. Again, things I know that you're very passionate about. Talk about the foundation and the impact that it continues to have.
Well, the foundation was created 7 years ago, but it was born out of the company's DNA, our footprint of being as committed to our community as we could be financially. And at the end of every giving cycle, every year, even since year one, I would look back at what we gave away, what we donated. And I was really always caught by the fact that as much money as it was for a small organization like mine, it didn't have the impact to the end user that I had hoped. It didn't really relate to my customers. And most importantly, it did not relate to my staff. And here's the truth. I have people that get in at, 1 a.m. to start baking, and our delivery driver shows up at so early you can't believe it to get food into all of our cafes. And, we have a very complex system where people are basically working almost 24 hours a day to keep this machine going. And they didn't get any of the credit, nor did they have any input. And that really bothered me. And at about the same time, 7-8 years ago, I became acutely aware of a need in our community. And it wasn't just a need in the community, as in the neighborhoods of Indianapolis, Indiana, but also within the restaurant community itself, where we have employees who at any moment upon losing a job can be right there where they have trouble accessing food, paying for rent, taking care of their families. So I thought we just needed we're big control freaks. I'm a big control freak. And by the way, I'm not ashamed to say that. And I just put this all together and thought, we could do better. I think we could be more efficient and solve something important that our community needs and have a greater impact. So the Patachou Foundation, we have to date served several 100,000 meals. Let me put it in terms of the pandemic. Pre the very beginning, first week of March, a year ago today, we were serving 1,000 meals a week to children in our community who live with pervasive food insecurity. It's a really fancy term for saying kids who are hungry. So 1,000 meals a week is a lot. The week of March 16th, we served 9,000 meals. That jump was because of a historic jump in need as a result of the early days of the pandemic. Now that has leveled off. We're now at about 4,000 meals a week. But that's what we do. But we do more than just serve meals. We also are integrated in the schools in which we serve. We have urban farms. We have a food fellows program that is directed towards high school juniors and seniors who are considering working in the food industry or hospitality industry in one way. They get credit. They get paid by the hour, so it's not a free internship. And they get transferable skills that if they decide to get a job, will get them more than a minimum wage position. And most importantly, they get college training, college counseling. So because many of the students that are in our fellows program are often from families where the parents did not have the opportunity to get educated, and they don't really know about their options. And of course, the public schools are very stretched with their staffing, and they have, quite honestly, more security guards than career counselors in these facilities. So that's what the Patachou Foundation does.
Martha, what's next? What's next for you? You've again, with the foundation and obviously with the development of your restaurant group, done some amazing things. I know more is ahead. Can you give us a kind of a preview? What's next?
We are expanding Café Patachou as a brand. We are looking at opening up multiple locations. This last year and a half, we've taken a beat on that, but we're back into it, shopping for positions. I'm starting a podcast of my own. So you got some competition.
Competition on the way. Okay.
I'm starting a podcast based on an internal document that we have used in my company for, 15 years, called Martha Book of Rules. And it's a list of our non-negotiables. And how it impacts your business relationships and your professional relationships. And I have found that what I call a segment of the population, what I determine driven women, are really interested in this subject. And I think it's very timely, especially now because of what has happened due to the pandemic to women in the workplace. So I'm starting that. We hope to be up and running midsummer with our first podcast. So thank you for letting me plug that.
I'll listen. You'll have a subscriber.
Thank you.
Definitely listen. Hey, in terms of your expansion, are you looking Indiana and beyond? What are your thoughts on where you're going to go with that?
Again, this goes back to me being a bit of a control freak. I need to be looking. Yes, we are looking in Indiana. We're looking in areas that I can drive to 2 to 3 hours so I can get there and get home. That's the expansion plan. It is literally that simple.
Yeah, I have a feeling there are going to be a lot of communities who are going to be very, very interested in that, to be sure. Hey, one more quick question. I'd love your take on the Indianapolis, maybe more broadly Indiana, but the Indianapolis food scene. For a lot of years, the city had this reputation as a quote unquote chain town, a chain city. You and others have certainly changed that dynamic. How would you describe the food scene in Indianapolis?
I think it's really great. I think we've got so many young people engaged in food and hospitality right now. And it's really exciting. I don't believe that there should just be light shown on one restaurant or one restaurateur. It really is a tremendous community. And truly, every neighborhood has their gems. And I'm always very, very proud of the way that the people in Indianapolis support the local food scene. That has been the real change, is the way people support the local food scene.
Martha Hoover, the president and owner of the Patachou Foundation, or the Café Patachou, I should say, the company that has 14 restaurants. 10 are really getting after it right now, to be sure. She is a pioneer, trailblazer in many respects, and a major difference maker here in Indianapolis and beyond. Martha, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the podcast, and I wish you nothing but continued success.
Thank you. I really always love your engaged questions. Thank you so much.
All right. And thank you for joining us on this episode of the Business and Beyond podcast, presented by PNC. It's a weekly conversation with leaders in business, academia, politics, sports, and beyond. And for details on how to subscribe and connect with the podcast or get Indiana business news 24/7, all you have to do is go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.